Charlie was just telling me that fortunately amongst UUs, we do not respect authority that much, and I get told that I'm forgetting something, so thank you. Now, for real, our Reverend Charlie Davis and the war that did not end all wars.
Do you remember the Austria-Hungarian Empire? The Ottoman Empire? These are empires that existed at the beginning of World War I. Austria-Hungary became Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and southern Poland. The Ottoman Empire became Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Yemen, and parts of Saudi Arabia. Russia existed at the beginning of World War I. By the end, there was an internal revolution, and it became the Soviet Union, which had to surrender territory that became Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and eastern Poland. Germany lost territory that became northern Poland. Europe, at the turn of the 20th century, was a turbulent place. And there was basically two alliances that kept all-out war from breaking out. England, France, and Russia got along. And then in between them, running vertically, were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. But then there was this little country of Serbia. And it was between Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. And it then, as now, really was fiercely independent and didn't want to be ruled either by Austria-Hungary or by the Ottoman Empire. And was just a thorn in the side of the empires. And Austria decided to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, their prince. And this was like, let's knock over this little domino. And that just started a fire all over Europe. Since Russia was a friend of Serbia, Germany got scared and attacked France. I remember when my son first explained this to me, I didn't understand it. So I had him repeat it to me, that since Russia was a friend of Serbia, Germany got scared and attacked France. There, now it makes sense. Soon everybody was fighting and nobody really seemed to know why and what outcome to expect. Author H.G. Wells in 1914 wrote a book, and he theorized that behind it all was German militarism, and that if we stopped that, the war would be stopped, and he entitled the book, "The War That Will End War." And that's where we got the phrase, "the war that will end all wars." And that phrase grew in popularity. But what people forgot when adopting this name was that H.G. Wells was a science fiction writer. Living under the sea or time travel is more possible than using war to end war. War and violence present itself as a quick solution, but almost never is. The Austro-Hungarians killed a Serbian prince, thinking, well, that'll put an end to that rebel. But instead it created a martyr and drew France, Russia, and Great Britain into the conflict. Germans thought that they could quickly conquer France, but instead got bogged down in trench warfare after Britain joined France. And they said, well, what do we do to stop Britain? well, why don't we start attacking American shipping? Well, that brought America into the war, and that's what ended it for Germany. And Germany lost the war, but only because it was the only survivor. Russia and the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire no longer existed. They were transformed into multiple countries or into the Soviet Union, which was just struggling and poverty stricken, and that Germany, being the only existing government left, was the only one left to punish for the cost of the war. And thus, they were punished with economic sanctions. And this eventually led to the rise of Hitler and to World War II. And so essentially the Allies won the war, but lost the peace, because the terms of peace led to war. Because people think of peace as the cessation of fighting. And you can cease fighting by intimidation and making people too afraid to resist. But that only works for a while, because people can only stand oppression for so long. And that's a negative peace, a peace that is there by domination. A positive peace is a peace that is built upon justice. Justice where people have enough to eat, that people have a chance to raise their family and love each other. So we need not to have a peace that's the absence of violence, but a peace that is the presence of justice. And I'm paraphrasing Dr. Martin Luther King in that. War is a difficult thing. Wealthy people protect their interest by sending poorer people to die. We talk of noble causes of war, such as to prevent genocide, but we turned away Jewish refugees before World War II. And we did not send troops when Russia took over Hungary in 1956. And we did nothing in Rwanda. And we're currently doing nothing with the genocide in Yemen, except profiting from arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Economics determine when we enter a war. And then politicians search for a nobler cause in order to sell it to the masses. And the masses are the ones that do the fighting and dying. And it's those whom I remember on Veterans Day. Yesterday morning, I had a chance to walk around the National Cemetery here in New Bern. And like all national cemeteries, there is a strange democracy among the tombstones. The tombstones from all wars are uniform in size. They're about this tall, white, slightly rounded at the top. And sometimes the writing is carved and not colored in any way, so age wears it away, so even the names sometimes just vanish, even among those soldiers that were known at the time they were buried. privates and officers are side by side in the order that they died. These people fought for what they believed were noble causes, and they were the ones that sacrificed while others profited. But when I have talked to most veterans of various conflicts from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and Desert Storm in Iraq and Afghanistan, over and over I'm told that what I fought for was the person next to me. The person next to me that was in this terrible situation with me. In the fog of war, politics and economics disappear. One is shoulder to shoulder with comrades. And this is what I remember on Veterans Day. The valor of people thrown into an impossible situation, finding some sort of human integrity in the midst of the worst of all possible human experiences. These type of sermons are difficult for me to preach, and they're conversations that are difficult for me to have because philosophically, I'm a pacifist. I'm already against the next war. But there's times when the philosophical, moral high ground that I have come to intellectually has to give way to the heart and the reality of the person in front of me. And know that all of us in our lives make choices for multiple reasons on multiple levels. And that we should care for one another always. On this 100th anniversary, I want to commemorate that the fighting stopped at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. And I think the way to honor veterans is to stop the fighting. And that's a negative piece. But then I also think we have to create a positive piece to work to stop the fighting before it begins. I think it's right to have solemn remembrances in cemeteries and parks and our churches. But I think it's wrong to have military parades, air shows, glorifying our weaponry, and enticing our youth into a false narrative of violent domination. The money spent on promoting wars should be spent on healing wounded veterans. The Veteran Administration is seriously underfunded. Mental health resources are inadequate. Statues give only the appearance of honor. They have no life. True honor would allow veterans to enjoy peace they are supposedly defending and enrich their actual lives. We live in a time of increasing political violence. Armed white males are shooting up synagogues, African American churches, and music clubs, and they are being enabled by people who profit from the sale of guns. The U.S. leads in gun deaths, ahead of Afghanistan and Iraq. So we are in more of a war zone than the war zones that we have created. So we're in a war right here. The left has tended to use nonviolent resistance, but I have seen the rise of violent resistance on the left. The shooting of Republican congressmen last year should horrify any true leftist. Not only does it violate our true principles, it allows perpetrators of right-wing violences to say that the problem exists on both sides, thus creating a false equivalency. Our country is deeply divided, and in order to prevent another violent civil war, it takes courage for one side to resist being violent. And I don't think it is the side that worships guns that we can expect that from. But I'm not saying that we should give up. Nonviolence resistance is still resistance, and it is powerful. It toppled the British Empire in India. It toppled the military dictatorship that was supported by the United States in the Philippines. The overthrow of the Soviet Union was largely nonviolent. The separation of Czechoslovakia into the Czech and the Slovak Republic was nonviolent. But we have to work for peace as diligently as others prepare for war. While they stockpile weapons, we stockpile votes. We build communities of caring, networks of support. We spend our money wisely. We stop supporting companies that support war. We stop shopping at stores that exploit workers. We invest in companies that are ecologically viable. We personally learn to live with less so that there is more to share. This community knows cooperation. Hurricane Florence has forced it upon you. And I heard the empathy that was in this room for the community of paradise. There is an illusion of self-sufficiency that's shattered in times of crisis. And when there is no apparent violence in our lives, we sometimes forget to do the work of peace. Because the work of positive peace is what we need to do all the time. When we meet in our churches and we educate our young how to communicate without violence. We teach ourselves how to reason and how not to be swayed by emotional arguments. And we work at talking with others about who we are and how our faith is lived 7 days a week. This engagement can't wait to the point of a crisis. The big argument is, what would nonviolence do in the face of Hitler? Well, people are always talking about Hitler in 1938 when he's invading Poland. But what about Hitler in 1931 when he came to power? Or 1925 when we could have been more just with Germany. That's the building of justice. Activism is at a high point in our community. There was about 100 people out on the point this past Thursday night on a very cold night when the Attorney General was fired, and there's thoughts that the investigation's going to end. But it's not only stopping evil and protesting and speaking up that we need to do. We also need to show up all those times to build the good. If people see positive alternatives, they will be less likely to be sucked in by the deceptions. So my question for you as we end today is that thought: what are you doing, what are we doing to build positive peace? And I'll leave that question with you as we go on to our next hymn and conclude our service. What is it?